appreciation of where the Black River has been and how far along it is toward recovery can best be appreciated by watching two videos made over a decade apart by the Black River Remedial Action Plan Coordinating Committee. The Black River RAP has produced this shortened video that highlights the two previous efforts. The restoration effort in the Black River watershed did not begin until the main stem was named one of the 43 most polluted river systems in the Great Lakes. At the time, the designation as an area of concern, or AOC, was justified.
We first went out and looked at this, the river. There was no oxygen in the Black River. There was black goo coming out of U.S. Steel. That was clearly
There was very little life in the river due to high ammonia levels. It was toxic to the ammonia levels were toxic to the organisms that were trying to live in the river. So in '82, things were pretty bad. The river was in really sad shape.
There was at least a 60% tumor rate in the livers and a 38% cancer rate, and we had between a 12 and 20% external tumor rate, either lip tumors or skin tumors.
The river, when I was a kid, was someplace where you wouldn't even go around to play, and someplace you were told by your parents to keep away from because of the dirtiness of it and the pollution. I remember even fishing wasn't a good idea. I remember the pictures of the carp with cancer pulled out all over them, and the different fish with all deformed because of the different pollutions. So I remember as a kid it was a pretty rough area.
That was where the river and watershed were. Over the past 2 decades, improvements have been seen in the Black River. More can be done to help. Contaminated sediments were removed and the health of the fish in the main stem improved. Now, more animal species, described as sentinel species, have or are returning. Sentinel species are organisms whose return to an area indicate improving conditions. Bald eagles are returning. River otters are returning. Even the great blue heron have increased their numbers in the watershed. In and around Lodi, recent restoration projects have allowed the streams there to recover. According to the Ohio EPA, this area is nearly restored. The work there involved repairing severely eroding riverbanks, restoring natural riparian vegetation, and through an innovative series of weir structures, raising the stream bottom, allowing the stream to reconnect to its floodplain. The construction of the fish habitat shelf in Lorain has improved the numbers and diversity of the fish communities in the area. Required upgrades to municipal systems have reduced the nuisance algae blooms in the East Branch and allowed the bottom-dwelling creatures to recover. Most of the improvements over the years came from cleaning up past environmental insults or cleaning up end-of-pipe discharges to the river system. Today, the problems in the watershed are not so easy to see or clean up as the discharge from a pipe. Today's problem comes from everywhere in the watershed. The problem is called non-point source pollution.
I think the main problem is the non-point source issue. And when we say non-point source pollution, we mean those types of pollution that are not associated with a pipe coming out of a factory or a wastewater treatment plant, but actually the kind of runoff that comes off of streets, it comes off of your yard, it comes off of an agricultural setting, if you will, or a feedlot. And those kinds of quick runoffs can have a great deal of impact on the watershed and the river, particularly as it relates to the fish, the nutrients, and of course the habitat where the fish and the microorganisms live.
Simply put, if you can point to where the pollution is coming from, that would be a point source. Cleaning up point source problems are easy because you can locate them. Cleaning up non-point source problems are more difficult because it is so diverse, it is so watershed wide.
The Black River watershed acts like a bathtub, transporting and funneling water to one single outlet source, its river mouth at Lake Erie. But along the way, whatever is dropped on or applied to the land can and does get to the river system. Disturbing the soil allows that soil to run off to the rivers and streams. Runoff pollution comes from all over the watershed, and that is why it is so hard to control. The sources may be difficult to find, but the effects are not.
In areas of the Upper Black River watershed, more than 20% of our land is eroding at a rate of at least 5 tons per acre every year. The proof is in the picture. This is the mouth of the Black River before a rain, and this is the same place after a rain. What you see is a plume of sediment emptying into Lake Erie. What you see is the soil we're losing. Over 17,000 acres eroding at excessive levels, with more than 80% of it cropland.
Every area of the Black River suffers from excessive amounts of sediment getting to the streams. The excessive sediment loads are coming from agricultural land, improper development practices, and stream bank erosion. More than 50% of the land surface in the watershed is used for agricultural purposes. Often, agricultural land is left uncovered for long periods of time throughout the year. Disturbed land allows for erosion and soil runoff to the streams. There are ways to help this, not just in agricultural areas, but all over the watershed.
Farmers, homeowners, and developers along the Black River can also use a simple and natural technique to reduce erosion, flooding, and chemical runoff. It's called a riparian border. It's a buffer strip of plants right along the water's edge, such as trees, shrubs, and some native plants and grasses. A riparian border can make a huge difference in holding the soil in place, and that soil also helps clean the water by filtering out pollutants in runoff water.
In addition, improper and untimely application of fertilizers and agricultural chemicals can allow excess nutrients to run off to the streams. As part of the Black River TMDL study and report, Lorain and Medina Soil and Water Conservation Districts have developed a non-point source plan and strategy to address problems with sediment and nutrients getting to the streams. But with runoff types of pollution, problems start with stormwater and snowmelt. Ways of controlling the amount of runoff must be implemented. We cannot continue to pass this problem along.
Too often in the past, one city would focus on their needs and, for example, stormwater. And they thought the solution to the stormwater was to get the water away as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. When you do that, all you do is create headaches for the person downstream. You destroy habitat and you just transfer your problems to the community next door, and you're not being a good neighbor. So I think there needs to be a way where communities can communicate, can work together on stormwater problems, so they're not creating headaches for one another, and costly headaches, really, to save money overall.
For flooding and stormwater control, we must work together. Sometimes the amount of water getting to the streams overloads the stream's capacity. These times are called flood events. Don't floods seem like they have been coming more frequently? They just may be. This graph shows the flow of the Black River at Elyria from 1945 to 2006. The arrowed line is a best fit trend line used to observe trends in data. As you can see, it appears the trend for the Black River is increasing river flows. Remember, if the flow exceeds the stream's capacity, flooding occurs. What if the river flow is increasing but rainfall is not? This graph shows that while the trend for river flow, the blue arrowed line, may be increasing, the trend for the amount of rainfall, the green arrowed line, appears to be relatively level. An increased rainfall may not be causing the increasing incidence of floods that we have been experiencing. From where can the extra river flow be coming? An increase in water getting to the streams may be caused by the way the land is being developed, especially if the amount of impervious surface increases in the watershed as a result. Impervious surfaces are man-made surfaces, like concrete and asphalt, that do not allow absorption and penetration by water. If water cannot penetrate, the water runs off, often very quickly and with great force. In this problem, we are not alone. Other watersheds are experiencing the same problems with imperviousness, runoff, and
I think we just need to look at places that have already been developed, such as the Cuyahoga River, places like East Lake that receive waters that have already been developed upstream, and now they're dealing with flooding, they're dealing with siltation, and so on. This is what could happen to other rivers that are perhaps less developed right now if we don't take some action and make sure that the kind of development we're doing is sound. What we're trying to do is just help the developer understand what options may be available that will increase the environmental value of the development project. Usually that means finding ways to set aside open space in the right places to reduce the impact of that development project on the environment. So we're looking for ways to reduce impervious surface on the property, to increase the filtering and management of stormwater, to preserve habitat, and so on.
Lorain County is on a verge of a lot of development coming from the west from Cleveland. And I think we have the opportunity now to establish those land use practices that we're not going to see just subdivision after subdivision without green space, without water quality protection and riparian zone protection. If we could do that now, I think we're going to really help the river in the next 20 years.
we need to find better ways to develop the land, ways with less impact to the environment, ways of protecting riverbanks, riparian corridors, and floodplains.
Low-impact development was conceived in the early 1980s to devise economical ways to manage the quantity and quality of stormwater runoff. Often, small, carefully placed landscape features are used that slow runoff and reduce the rate water is added to streams. Site designs that preserve existing streams or wetlands when possible provide effective stormwater management in some situations.
So in the first instance, those resources are providing flood control, erosion control, and water quality protection, and those services are essentially free. Communities make a choice when you allow development of those resources to replace that free system with an infrastructure-intensive system. So to the extent that communities can, it's important to maintain those resources because you have less costs going forward.
Ohio law requires post-construction stormwater management for new developments in hundreds of communities with separate storm sewer systems. Removing pollutants from runoff is the main goal, but it is equally important to reduce runoff in the first place. Ultimately, runoff rates from new developments should not exceed pre-development rates.
Some of the best post-construction stormwater management practices are really design practices. Low-impact development is one method to promote the natural drainage system, which is therefore going to limit the amount of runoff that leaves the property. The best way to slow runoff from impervious surfaces is to, I guess a rule of thumb would be to put green in between. Wherever you do not need to pave, that's, leave that green and, open for stormwater to infiltrate through. The next thing you're going to want to do is to break up your impervious surfaces. Your roof runoff should go through a green area, a vegetated area. Use things like vegetated swales and grassy filter strips as opposed to piping your runoff.
Reducing and treating runoff also can be done with innovative methods like permeable pavement, constructed wetlands, or biofiltration trenches that use microbes already found in soil to break down pollutants. Low-impact development ideas represent a major shift from traditional stormwater management practices. Specifics vary from site to site. Ongoing maintenance must not be overlooked. In general, site designs mixing low-impact development with traditional drainage practices often result in lower overall costs.
We're not talking about watershed protection, we're talking about reducing communities' costs and minimizing taxpayer costs for long-term stormwater management. So I think it's a repositioning that interested citizens have to take and saying we're not an environmental group, we don't want to maintain these wetlands because they're pretty and the birds live here. We want to maintain these because we don't want to have to foot the bill for long-term stormwater problems. And once you switch the dialogue from environment to economics, it makes much more sense and it's much less easy for local officials to dismiss that particular argument.
Most change is met with resistance, but developers and land use planners working in rapidly developing areas have financial incentives to learn new methods and think differently about stormwater management. Local zoning and building codes need to change to allow the use of low-impact development strategies.
So there's a burden on developers to sort of step up and realize that there's opportunities for them in terms of creating a new design product and then also lowering their infrastructure costs. Communities, elected officials are going to have to step up in terms of realizing that if they want to maintain their naturally functioning stormwater infrastructure, they're going to have to adopt the necessary codes and be permissive enough to give developers the flexibility to come up with interesting site design.
Protecting streams in urban areas poses challenges to developers, site designers, and local officials who are responsible for regulating construction projects. Traditional drainage practices will need to be reconsidered to reduce damage to local water resources. Cooperation between municipalities that share developing watersheds will be the key to successful low-impact growth. Residents must become involved with local land use planning so that problems related to development can be prevented before there's a crisis.
Around the watershed, other problems have been noted, such as bacterial contamination, fish tissue contamination, and an overall degradation of aesthetics. Bacterial contamination hinders our recreational use of the river system. Although improving, high levels of bacteria are evident in almost every area of the Black River watershed. High bacteria levels can indicate the possible presence of other harmful bacteria and viruses. One source of the bacteria could be home sewage treatment systems.
Can also make a mammoth difference. In rural areas without sanitary sewer systems, each home treats sewage individually with underground septic tanks. These tanks were often installed as long ago as the 1930s and 40s. Even 20-year-old systems are overloaded with today's modern appliances, like dishwashers. Many of our septic systems are now outdated and usually not maintained by homeowners.
They need to be pumped out periodically. There are motors in them, moving parts, aerators. Those need to be maintained, run properly so that the water coming out on the clean side is in fact clean.
In many cases, that water coming out of the older septic systems is not clean, and that means human waste is going directly from our septic systems into the river.
The new homeowners I don't think impact it very much because all the sewage systems are on lot. In the old homes where these sewage systems aren't maintained properly, some of them have direct outlets to the river or to creeks and streams that go to the river, and they would cause a lot of untreated sewage or effluent to go there.
The general thought is if my toilet flushes, then my system's working. But what is happening is the wastewater is going down our drains from our home into the tank, and the tank is discharging to a pipe, and the pipe is going to a stream that goes to the Black River, that goes to Lake Erie, and it's basically a direct shot.
Septic systems aren't a priority to the homeowner until they back up or fail. Failing means that somewhere in your yard you've got a sewage water effluent bubbling out, and then they panic. Sometimes homeowners try to fix it themselves by taking a direct line to the creek or river, and of course that's terrible, but there's just a lack of education, a lack of desire to know about it and do anything with it until it's a problem. And as long as there's not a density of them and they're spread out, it's not as bad. But you get into a highly developed area where the houses are close together, it would be much worse. Now everything is concentrated on lot. Your sewage system is treated on lot and it is disposed on lot, where it actually soaks into the ground by way of an at-grade system or a Wisconsin mound, which the sewage is pumped up into a large amount of sand and it filters down through it. So it never leaves your lot, and that way it doesn't impact the river at all.
What's the solution for homeowners with old sewage treatment systems? They should maintain or upgrade what they have, and where it's possible, install sanitary sewers.
The Black River RAP and the Lorain County General Health District, with funding made available from the Ohio EPA, have developed an educational video on home sewage. In Lorain County, a copy will be given to every home system owner at the time of system inspection. For those who like to fish, there is still a big problem in many areas of the Black River watershed. Residents still cannot freely eat some of the fish they catch. There are restrictions to fish consumption in the main stem, both branches, and Finley Lake. The restrictions are mainly due to mercury contamination. The Black River RAP and the local watershed coordinator have been working to restore the watershed. Aside from the initiatives already discussed, more is happening, like working with the Ohio EPA in the production of the Black River TMDL study and plan. Remedial action plan work is meant to be locally driven and not seen as a regulatory authority. RAP committees have been tasked with restoring certain uses of the river system, including fish and wildlife consumption with no tainting of flavor, no problems with the water as a source for drinking water, no health-related restrictions on recreation, no restrictions on ship channel dredging, no added costs needed to use the water for agriculture or industrial purposes, no degradation of aesthetics, no problems with fish or wildlife populations or their habitat, no fish tumors or bird or animal deformities. Here are some of the other things on which the RAP has been working. A few years ago, the RAP produced a highly successful brochure for the French Creek watershed. The RAP is soon to release 2 new brochures, one for the East Branch watershed and one for the West Branch watershed. In cooperation with the U.S. EPA and a small group of local stakeholders, the Black River RAP has started an initiative that promises to join the needed economic development in the city of Lorain with a respect for the needs of the environment. Dan Gouch will soon discuss his efforts in the watershed, but his efforts and those of the RAP are meant to be locally organized and driven. All too often, the local watershed community has not enjoyed the efforts. Now, more than ever, the efforts to restore and protect your watershed are needed. To continue the restoration process, it is going to take the combined efforts of people who care. It is going to require decisions and effort from concerned decision makers like those in this room today. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, not enough people cared about or understood what was happening to the river system, and we all remember what happened then. The Black River became one of the most polluted systems in the Great Lakes. Since then, the Black River has improved. The progress needs to continue so as not to lose the ground gained. But in order for progress to continue, the Black River needs your active involvement and support. The Black River has come a long way from where it was, but we still have a long way to go.